So I thought a lot about what the rule is. And the rule is, don't be an idiot. You know, if you're going to smoke pot, don't smoke so much that you're a drooling moron and everyone can tell you're stoned from 2 blocks away, because that's humiliating to you and to the observer as well. It's degrading. So, and sex is like that too. It's like, who's got the upper hand, you or the sex? What did I teach my children about sex? Is there a healthy middle ground for them without being naively celibate or damagingly promiscuous? And how did you communicate that? You know, I didn't teach them, my kids, much explicitly about sex. I actually don't remember any conversations about sex per se. And I can't even really remember how they found out about sex. I'm certain that they knew the basic mechanics plenty early enough. So it wasn't like it was a taboo subject. It just, in some sense, never seemed necessary. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't any instruction about sex in our household. I mean, the kids watched. I mean, what do you teach children about sex? Well, you teach them how to be good people in the broadest possible sense. And so one element of that would be, don't casually use and hurt other people. And you act that out as a parent to the degree that you're capable, and your children observe that. They also observe how you treat your wife or husband. Oh, they're observing that all the time. You can be sure of that. And then they also observe how you treat your son and your daughter, and how you differentially treat them as well. And so they're learning about sex in the broader context of human relationships all the time. And most of that's implicit. And so, you know, my wife Tammy and I have a strong monogamous relationship. That's what we explicitly committed to and what we both implicitly desire. And physical affection, and some of that demonstrative, some of that the kids witnessed, us hugging or kissing, that sort of thing. Nothing more than that. No, but they certainly weren't strangers to the idea that we found each other attractive, and that we wanted to be with each other without them with some degree of frequency. And all of that is instructive to children. But I think the most important lesson about the morality of sex was probably taught to them merely as a consequence of observing how we treated each other, and also, by extension, how we treated them. I think that the expectation that they dealt with sex wisely was part of a broader expectation that they dealt with temptation wisely, with drugs, for example. I thought about this a lot because, and this has to do with your issue of, you know, is there a reasonable middle ground, healthy middle ground? I knew from the psychological literature that there was a healthy middle ground with regard to rule breaking in adolescence, right? So you see pathology at both ends of the normal distribution. There's kids who break rules all the time, the antisocial types, and they, you know, they're at risk for being arrested and for long-term criminal behavior. They're at higher risk for that sort of thing, and getting in trouble at school, getting in trouble with the police as teenagers, all of that. And that's obvious, right? But then on the other end of the distribution, there are kids who never break any rules. And you might think, well, that's optimal, you know. They don't break laws, they never shoplift. And this is not a pro-shoplifting message, by the way. But, you know, healthy teenagers push the limits. They break some rules. The ones who never do that sort of thing tend to have a proclivity towards internalizing disorders. That's what they're called. Externalizing disorders are disorders of acting out, and internalizing disorders are more like depression and anxiety. So they tend to be over-inhibited and over-emotional in a negative sense, and suffer more from depression and anxiety because they're terrified. And that's partly why they don't break any rules. They're too afraid. And that has a detrimental long-term consequence for them. So, you don't want your children to be unable to take risks because they're terrified of doing something wrong, of breaking a rule, and they need to test limits. With drugs, I told them, I better not ever be able to tell that you've been using something. Because if I can tell, then you can't handle it. And that means that you're not doing it appropriately. And that was about the best I could muster because it was complicated. I knew that they were going to smoke pot. They went to alternative schools. That was a given. It's like, well, what's the rule exactly? Don't do drugs. Well, they probably observed Tammy or I taking the odd puff. So, and maybe having the odd drink. And so, that rule wasn't abided by rigidly by either of us, though we certainly didn't abuse anything. Or if we did, it was only on very special occasions. So I thought a lot about what the rule is. And the rule is, don't be an idiot. If you're going to smoke pot, don't smoke so much that you're a drooling moron and everyone can tell you're stoned from 2 blocks away, because that's humiliating to you and to the observer as well. It's degrading. So, and sex is like that too. It's like, who's got the upper hand, you or the sex? So, and I think the kids just knew that. And, I watched their relationships. They had serial monogamous relationships as teenagers, which is par for the course. And by and large, they handled them as well as you could expect 2 reasonable people who were teenagers to handle them. And I generally liked their choice of partner, thank God, although not always. And that was awful when that was the case, but it didn't happen that frequently. So I didn't have to teach them explicitly what they had already been taught implicitly. And you probably can't teach things explicitly if they haven't had the groundwork laid for that teaching implicitly.